Jai Shri Ram. Yesterday was July 4th here in America, which is Independence Day. And that got me to think and reflect about the country, its history, what it means to be an American, and all of those kinds of things, which I always think about whenever this holiday comes around. And first and foremost, what I was thinking of was how I was taught in school about what America is, what it's about, and what it means to be an American, which ever since I was in third grade, I can remember being taught during history lessons and later in history classes and so on that the fact that the United States, or what eventually became the United States, rebelled against tyrannical colonial power of the British Crown, and they wanted representation for themselves in government, and they were fighting against unjust taxation and all these kinds of things, that these were basically absolute goods, that classical liberalism, classical liberal ideas, the ideas of the Enlightenment, and the specific form of government that we have today, that these are basically like the pinnacle of human civilization. Not that those words were used, but whenever any other country would be talked about, it was always talked about in terms of those lines. And obviously, the other country to talk about here is Britain, which at that time was a constitutional monarchy. And we were given and reinforced this idea, and to some degree, you could say brainwashed with this idea that democratic Republican form of government like we have in the US is basically the ideal form. Any form of government like a monarchy where someone who is unelected holds a place in power, that is it's inherently oppressive, inherently tyrannical, and it didn't really boil down to what those particular rulers were attempting to do. It was always about, or it was primarily about, the fact that they were not elected into office in the first place, and then secondarily, only the narrative that portrayed them as being particularly tyrannical and oppressive from the American colonial point of view as opposed to the British point of view was ever put forward. So whenever we would learn about these supposedly oppressive taxes that the American colonists had to pay to Britain, we were never given a context as to what were related taxes paid by the British, what really was the supposed lack of representation that we had in government, so on and so forth. And the reason I think this is important is because I found it very effective, to be quite honest with you. I think that the way that we were taught about being an American when I was in school was very effective to get children thinking along those lines before they are really intelligent or mature enough to form ideas for themselves to kind of push back against this narrative. And what I also see happening in America today with the critical race theory and all of, painting the founding fathers as racist, sexist, slave owners and things of this nature is that basic value system has gone away. Now, of course, I was born in 1992, so when I'm talking about third grade, starting to learn this stuff, this is back in 2001. So, I have not gone through schooling since the time that I was in school. All I know about what is being taught now is what I see on the news and what I see in, people covering it, talking about, these are the changes in the curriculums and they're trying to push this narrative, so on and so forth. But I think that at least as recently as my time period, we were getting a basically uniform, not only an idea of being pro-America, but an idea of seeing American history, colonialism, world events, World War I and II, and so on, through an American perspective, which I think if you are going to see yourself as having some identity and be proud of it and work for that country's interests, you basically have to have that. You can't really build up America if you think that America is inherently an evil project. In the same way, and this is true for any country around the globe. And as people who are interested in Hindutva, the reason that I bring this up specifically with respect to us is you have to, as people who are trying to frame a school curriculum for kids to learn, you have to get children to think about who they are and what it means to be a member of this society and what it means to be Indian in a way that is pro-nation, and also in a way that, or at a time, starting at a time period in their life where they're too young to really understand either their own personal thoughts or what they're trying to be indoctrinated by their parents or the larger community around them from their religious group or caste group or whatever the case may be. Because once this, I think for the overwhelming majority of people, once this worldview and perspective on society and identity are formed, it doesn't really get significantly changed. Obviously, there are some very small number of people, maybe they were coming from an SC background, they were indoctrinated into being an Ambedkarite, then they learn some more history and they observe society and they find that that's not true and they become more pro-Hindu. Of course, those kinds of things happen, here and there for people. But I think largely because, one, the overwhelming majority of people are not very independent-minded or good at critical thinking. And two, the vast majority of people are also not particularly interested in things like government, politics, civics, society, and history. So they will just kind of digest whatever they have been given and then move forward. So I think it's extraordinarily important to really focus on this and kind of craft a narrative that you can inculcate into the minds of young Indians that this is who you are, this is what it means to be Indian, this is what it means to be a Hindu. Now, on the other side, and by other side I mean people who are actually doing this quite well, but for an anti-national kind of a persuasion, I think the Congress Party did very well at creating this among people which supported their ideology, because if you meet the average Indian person that is not particularly interested in these topics, they believe in things like Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb. Now, where did they get the idea of Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb? It's not because they grew up with it, because it's not real. It's not because they were told it by their parents, because either they were not told that by their parents, or their parents only believed that because when they were in school, they were indoctrinated by the same thing. It's because you have an educational system that gives you this idea that Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb is real. It gives you this idea that Hindus and Muslims lived alongside each other and were very happy and friendly until the British came and somehow divided these Hindu and Muslim brothers against one another. Now, obviously the British did a lot of divide and rule. That is true in terms of caste and language and region and different kingdoms and so on and so forth. But as far as Hindus and Muslims, there was no divide and rule there. There was just an exploitation of already existing divisions. But the way that the kind of official establishment narrative that I think the vast majority of Indians grew up learning is that just as we would understand the Aryan-Dravidian divide is something that was kind of not created, but the idea that this is a social divide and cultural divide was created by Europeans, they would claim that, even this idea that Hindus and Muslims need to be apart and they're not one and they have to be, engaged in communal riots against each other, so on and so forth, that was also created by the British, which, anyone who looks at history quite honestly would understand that that's very much not the case. And even just people who observe society or read about religion and study history and stuff like that, they would understand that that's not the case either. But again, like I said, the vast majority of people are not really intellectually interested in this stuff. And so it's only when there are people out there in, the media, people who become popular figures, Rajiv Malhotra from the US, or people like Jesai Deepak in India, that these kinds of people become popular online and in various forums, that then people start to be introduced to a more kind of Indic, for lack of a better term, idea of what it means to be Indian, and also an idea of past Hindu-Muslim relations, so on and so forth. And I think another way in which the Congress has been very successful at this project is they keep engendering this deep hatred for the British all the time, even though the British have been gone for 70 plus years. They will they will try to run India in a way that is directly descended from the British. They have a worldview which is directly descended from the British. And yet, because they were the preeminent party during the time when the British decided to leave, they want to take credit for that and keep continuing to bring up how they were the party that, gave independence, so on and so forth. And I think that, I see a lot of people, and by people I mean uncles, really, people who were actually lived a large portion of their life when Congress was the preeminent party, and even before the time when the BJP was relevant, like people of my father's generation, basically, that they really like to spend a lot of time insulting the Congress and making jokes about Rahul Gandhi and saying the Congress is dumb and so on and so forth. And I think if we adopt this BJP mindset that winning elections is the only thing that matters, and we don't really understand that once you win an election, you need to then create a future that's conducive to you continuing to win elections, and more importantly than that, actually further the agenda that people put you in power for, there's never going to be any progress that the Hindutva forces ever make. Besides, in some certain states you have strong CMs that, will bulldoze the homes of people who are throwing rocks at some kind of a Hindu procession, or you win these little symbolic victories here and there that don't actually change the tide in a large way. The only way to really get to the next level, I think, is to be able to successfully inculcate within young people an identity of themselves, which corresponds with the kind of Hindutvawadi, Sangh Parivar kind of an idea of what India is, what Indian civilization is, what being a Hindu means, and what being an Indian is. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram.